All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I've touched on this sentiment previously on this channel. I've probably touched on this sentiment numerous times on this channel, the importance of self-awareness. Because oftentimes, an accurate understanding of self-awareness is going to determine whether or not you're able to achieve your goals in your life. Because in order for you to understand what your goals should be, you have to be aware of them. You have to be aware of where you are in your life and where you want to go. I say all that because Mr. Chris Paul of the Houston Rockets understands that the clock is ticking on his career. At a little bit over 6 feet, he is a great basketball player, but longevity is not normally associated with players of his stature in regards to playing a prominent role on championship level teams. He's 33 going on 34, and he understands that for all intents and purposes for this coming NBA season, if he cannot defeat the Golden State Warriors, well, let me correct myself. I believe that the brother understands that if he and the Houston Rockets are not good enough to defeat the Golden State Warriors in this up-and-coming 2018-2019 regular season in the NBA into the playoffs, that all hope is lost. And that's why he's pretty much going to let it all hang out. He's trying to recruit his best friend, Mr. Lebron James. Understand that they're both godfathers to each other's children. We'll see if LeBron is going to listen to him. I don't think that it's going to be feasible. And I really don't think that LeBron James particularly fits into that style of play. Beyond that, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to vibe as well with James Harden as Chris Paul did. Because it's one thing to have two ball-centric players. To bring LeBron James in, you're talking about the epitome of the ball-centric player. Will James Harden and Chris Paul be willing to be spot-up jump shooters? We'll see. And also, how are they going to be able to hold on to their other components? But anyway, Chris Paul pretty much has determined that his future lies in Houston. Even though he is a free agent, he is pretty much confirmed that he's going to re-sign, as he should. So they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Wait, guys. All right, we begin with Chris Paul, who was oh so close to a finals appearance. Then the injury bug got him, and according to our...
He wasn't quite as close as the media is trying to make it out to be, but he was relatively close. I believe that Andre Iguodala's injury was just as important to the outcome of the series as Chris Paul's injury, because I believe that had both players stayed completely healthy for the whole series, that the Warriors would have won in 5 games.
To our Adrian Wojnarowski, he wants a second stab at it with Houston. Chris Paul plans to stay with the Rockets and is trying to lure his banana boat buddy LeBron James this offseason.
Chris Paul, let me say this. If you can get LeBron James to come and play with you on the Houston Rockets and you guys still do not win the title, all 3 of you might as well retire. I'm just being real with you. If you're able to get your homeboy LeBron James to come onto the Houston Rockets and you have Chris Paul, LeBron James, and James Harden and all the PEDs in the world, allegedly, and you brothers still cannot defeat the Golden State Warriors, your ass might as well retire.
Stephen A., is CP3 enough for the Rockets to win the chip?
I believe he is. I believe he is if things stand as presently constructed, meaning that LeBron James doesn't join the Warriors or something like that happening. I think that as teams stand pat right now, I could see the Houston Rockets winning the World Championship next year.
Well, I could see that too. They're certainly up there with anyone else. I would put them about a half rung below the Warriors. But if the Houston Rockets were to meet up with the Boston Celtics in the finals, it wouldn't shock me, no. They're very competitive with the Golden State Warriors. I just think that over the course of a 7-game series, barring injury to a major player on the Warriors, the Rockets are just not going to have what it takes unless they're able to make a major acquisition. I think that they are going to take a step down in regards to their supplementary players, though.
Yeah, I got a lot of love for James Harden, got a lot of love for CP3 and what they bring to the table, even though I was of the mindset that Golden State would have still found a way to win the championship this year.
Let me say this, Stephen A. Smith. Had Chris Paul been fully healthy for games 6 and 7, and the Golden State Warriors were still without Andre Iguodala, I think that the Rockets would have found a way to win that 4th game. Especially if they would have been able to get up by 20-plus points in Game 6 with a healthy Chris Paul, like they were without a healthy Chris Paul. I think that Chris Paul would have found a way to make sure that the troops were settled and that Golden State would not have been allowed to fully make a comeback like they were able to.
they would have beaten Houston in Game 7 no matter what, in my opinion, whether CP3 was healthy or not. I was just incredibly impressed with what I saw from Houston. I am of the mindset that Houston, as presently...
I was very impressed with what I saw from the Houston Rockets on defense more than offense.
Constructed. I think they come back next year even hungrier. I think if they were healthy, with CP3 healthy, I think they could win the chip. I don't think they need to make changes. That's not to say you turn it down. If you have LeBron wants to come, you don't turn him down.
If I'm the Golden State Warriors right now, I'm trying to see if I can steal Trevor Ariza away from the Houston Rockets. And I'm also trying to see if I can get some help on the inside defensively. That's really what the Golden State Warriors are going to need. Whether LeBron James goes there or not, if LeBron James comes to the Western Conference, the Golden State Warriors are still going to need some defensive help in the paint. A big man who could protect the rim. That's definitely what they need. If they're able to acquire that, you could pretty much sign them up for another championship, barring major injury.
You take it and you run with it because they clearly win the championship with LeBron. But even if you don't get him, if they can stay healthy, it's a big if, I understand that. But I'm just assuming I'm not taking into account injuries, Max, because we all understand if you're injured, you go down. That's that. But if you're healthy, your game and what you bring to the table, I believe Houston could win the championship as presently constructed with CP3 leading the way.
Right, but Stephen A. Smith, will you pick them? To say that they could win, I'm not sure if you're really saying anything of great profundity. The Boston Celtics could win the championship, but are you willing to pick them?
The thing about injuries, though, is some guys are more prone to them than others. The past can be prologue, so you do have to take that into account. And furthermore, if someone is off the court, have you given yourself the best chance, nevertheless, to win? So the question is, do the Rockets have enough? Look, when you get to a Game 7, when you're up 3-2, first of all, you got Golden State facing elimination, and eventually you get to a Game 7. And in that Game 7, your second best player, one of your two best players, can't play. And nevertheless, it takes an historically bad shooting night, 1 for 30 from downtown, for you to lose by single digits. It stands to reason that no, you don't really need to add anything. Had Chris Paul not been hurt, had you just had a bad shooting night instead of the worst shooting night in the history of basketball, you'd have won.
This is an example of media narrative 101. It's also a conveyance of how little they truly understand what they're watching. It's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You can take in empirical data, but are you willing to factor it in to what you're spewing out to the public? Number one, they constantly leave out the fact that Andre Iguodala was injured for the Golden State Warriors, I guess because it doesn't play into the notion of picking the Houston Rockets to win a championship as well as it does to play up how Chris Paul was hurt. Andre Iguodala is as important to the Golden State Warriors as Chris Paul is to the Houston Rockets, believe it or not. In the playoffs, he is. With the way that he can control the offense as a point forward or point guard, with the way that he can guard three positions, maybe even four, depending on who the opposing team's foreman is, and just his unbelievable defense. He's got the best hands on the defensive end in all of basketball. Chris Paul is still a great guard, but is he more important to the Rockets in the playoffs than Andre Iguodala is to the Warriors? No, I don't think so. So I think that the series that we saw in the Western Conference wasn't quite as close as people are trying to make it out to be. Beyond that, and I've already touched on this in other videos, the reason why the Rockets shot 1 for 30 in Game 7 isn't because Chris Paul wasn't there. It was because the short rotation that Mike D'Antoni was using over the course of the 7 games eventually wore them down. Because the intensity that they were showing on the defensive end against the Golden State Warriors, it was just too much for them to be able to take long-range jump shots on the offensive end. It's the equivalent of taking a body shot or a series of body shots in boxing in the early rounds. It's going to show in a fighter's ability to move his feet later on in the fight. And that's what we saw from the Houston Rockets. They were unable to make long jump shots on the offensive end because of the amount of energy they were expending on the defensive end trying to stop the Warriors' off-ball movement.
Not quite. The fact of the matter is Chris Paul was hurt and they did go 1 for 30 from downtown. At a certain point, was it 0 for 27 from downtown? I don't think those two things are unrelated.
I'm not saying that they're completely unrelated. I just don't think that they're as related as you're trying to make them out to be. I think that there's an even greater correlation between the shortness of Mike D'Antoni's rotation in regards to the amount of players that he was playing in that series, and also how much energy they were exerting on the defensive end and how it showed in their inability to make long-range jumpers.
I think Chris Paul not being on the court had a psychological impact on the team. After all, a team known for its shooting prowess, built to take those shots, hit 1 out of 30 of...
Well, once again, Max Kellerman, I think that your assertion that there was a psychological effect on the Houston Rockets due to the absence of Chris Paul would have made more sense had the Golden State Warriors taken 20-point leads early in Games 6 and 7. But due to the fact that the Rockets came out and took 20-point, 15-point leads in Games 6 and 7 consecutively, tells me that the issue was not the absence of Chris Paul. The issue was their conditioning and the amount of energy that they were exerting early on in the game.
Of them. So, Stephen A., I spoke to my father, the shrink, and I said, Dad...
Oh, that's the guy who did such great work on you, huh?
What do you think's going on psychologically with this team? Do you think it is psychological? And Stephen A., he told me about a task leader and an emotional leader. In every group, there's a task leader, but that task leader is not always the emotional leader. And I think what happened to the Rockets is the task leader was available, James Harden. The emotional leader was not. And without their emotional leader, the group couldn't function. So how does this all relate to what the Rockets need? The Rockets don't need anything major. Of course, as you say, Stephen A., if they get LeBron, great. Who's not taking LeBron on any team in the history of basketball? It makes them better, and clearly, I believe if they have LeBron, they're going to destroy everybody. But they don't need LeBron. They do need a very subtle adjustment to that roster. They need to find another player who is capable of being the emotional leader of that team in Chris Paul's absence. So, Stephen A., injury does play a factor because he hasn't been available at times, late in seasons, in playoffs, because of injury.
If
Chris
he's
Paul,
healthy,
that is. Doesn't mean you got to make a major
If he's
overhaul.
healthy, is he enough?
Well, I believe that if Chris Paul is fully healthy, that certainly makes them one of the top 3 teams in the NBA. I'll leave it at that, Stephen A. Smith. Could they win the championship? Sure. But would I pick them? No, I wouldn't. Because I think that there's a little bit too much being made of the fact that the Western Conference Finals won 7 games. I think that through 3 games, it was pretty much understood that the Warriors were the dominant team. And then Iguodala goes down. The Warriors go on to blow a big lead in Game 4. And then even in Game 5, without Iguodala, they were right there at the end. And you have Quinn Cook taking a 3-point shot, I believe, to either tie or take the lead in the game. And he really should not have even been in the game if Iguodala was there. And that's not to say that Iguodala would have knocked down that 3-point shot. I just believe that Iguodala would have been able to run the offense better and gotten another one of their more prominent players that same 3-point shot.
Yes, I believe they can beat Golden State if Chris Paul's on the court. But in terms of their roster, they need a subtle tweak, which is to find a player capable of playing significant minutes, even if it's off the bench, who can take Chris Paul's place emotionally on the team. They do that, I think they beat the Warriors.
That's difficult to find, though, Max Kellerman. Maybe if they can get back a Patrick Beverley. But I think that he may charge a little bit too much.
I have a question for you. Because you said that regardless if he stayed healthy, you still thought the Warriors would win, right?
This year.
Yeah, so why, if next year they're all healthy, why do you think they could actually
Because-
Great question, Molly Karam.
next year?
Because I think that the Warriors I saw a little vulnerability in them this year that I didn't see the previous season.
Okay.
So what you're assuming is that they're going to be even incrementally worse than they were this year because you're trying to correlate an incremental drop-off this year from the previous year. And I just don't see that. The media has tried to claim that the Warriors have dropped off in a visible way. I think that there's a natural drop-off when you have a team that has had this type of sustained success over the period of the last 4 years. And let's keep in mind, they won something like 57 or 58 games in the regular season. And Steph Curry missed, 25, 30 games due to injury. Kevin Durant missed games due to injury. Draymond Green missed games due to injury. Klay Thompson missed games due to injury. And the team still won somewhere in the high 50s. If they were healthy for the entire year, they most likely would have had the best record in the NBA again. Once again, I think that people are making a little bit too much out of what exactly transpired this season.
Okay. Okay.
They didn't look as formidable this year as they did last year. I don't count their series against Cleveland. Cleveland was clearly the inferior team. They had LeBron and pretty much nothing else, even though I won't.
Stephen A. Smith, let's be careful with your rhetoric right now. You're the same person who states that LeBron James has more help than people give him credit for. And I agree with you. Don't try to fall into that pit, that rabbit hole of claiming that LeBron has no help just to help your point about the Rockets.
Even though I won't say Kevin Love was nothing, because I thought Kevin Love did his job, but other guys did not step up. But in the case of the Golden State Warriors, I think one of the reasons you see them, even though they're talking to Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green is already on the record talking about how he doesn't plan to re-up if offered an extension this summer or whatever, because everybody wants to be a free agent the summer of 2019 because there's going to be more money out there to grab. The reality is that Golden State was still entertaining the notion of putting themselves in play for LeBron James, potentially Anthony Davis, in the event that New Orleans was interested in putting him out, or he was interested in moving on, and New Orleans was looking to talk to somebody because of that reality. You don't put yourself in play like that unless you notice some vulnerability.
No, not necessarily. I think that you don't put yourself in play like that for no reason. The Warriors have already established for a few seasons now that they consider themselves forward thinkers, that they're going to make the daring and the bold move. They're not willing to just stand pat and say to themselves, well, we have 4 prominent players and we're just going to let this ride. If they had that mindset, they would not have been courting Kevin Durant during a season when they won 73 games. The media has tried to reverse engineer the reason why the Warriors signed Kevin Durant. They've stated that the reason why the Golden State Warriors signed Kevin Durant is because they were scared of LeBron, or to bring in a player that would nullify LeBron. Now, in the aftermath of the 2016 disaster, of course, it made acquiring Kevin Durant a necessity and not just a luxury. But the fact of the matter is that they were courting Durant throughout that regular season. And I believe that he wanted to go there from the regular season of 2015-2016. But both he and them were trying to figure out how they would make it work, because had the Warriors went to the finals in 2016 and swept the Cavs like how they were supposed to, would they really have pressed for Kevin Durant? I'm not sure. I know for certain that if Kevin Durant had reservations in signing with the Golden State Warriors after they won 73 games and lost in the finals, that he certainly would have had far too many reservations to sign with them if they had won 73 games in the regular season, had came back to beat his squad from down 3-1 and then won the finals in a sweep. There's no way that he would have been able to sign with them. So it worked out well for everyone. But the point being is this: the Warriors have always established themselves as forward thinkers. So I don't think that if they were to press for an Anthony Davis or what have you, that it would be a sign of panicking.
You're a juggernaut. Nobody was talking about this about the Golden State Warriors last year, because once you acquired Kevin Durant, you were head and shoulders above everybody else. There was a tremendous balance shift in the balance of power. This year, we saw it get back to almost equal footing.
Let me say this: if the Golden State Warriors meet a fully healthy Boston Celtics team in the finals next year, it's probably going to be the best finals that we will have seen, going back to maybe the 2013 finals between Miami and the San Antonio Spurs.
And I saw some vulnerability because of that with the Golden State Warriors in terms of how they play.
That's right.
You can get physical with them. You can get up in them. Houston made them incredibly, incredibly uncomfortable in that Western Conference Final Series. And I think standing pat sets the stage for Houston to make another run at them.
Listen, I think you always have to try to improve your roster. Obviously, if Houston can get LeBron James, if Chris Paul can talk him into that, that makes them the favorites to beat everybody. Stephen A., to your point, the Golden State Warriors did seem more vulnerable this year, and it's not hard to see why. Not only did they...
I don't believe that they were more vulnerable. I think that they just had a weaker bench. They need smarter players coming off their bench. When you have Nick Young and JaVale McGee coming off your bench and you still are able to sweep in the finals, that shows you how great their starters are. Because one can make the case that Nick Young and JaVale McGee are the two dumbest players in NBA history. I mean, let's be for real. They both won Shaqtin' a Fool awards. Both those players have won Shaqtin' a Fool awards. And they were so inept on the basketball court mentally that they were heavy in contributing to Shaq saying, I'm going to change the paradigm of awarding the Shaqtin' a Fool award. I believe Joel Embiid got the overall Shaqtin' a Fool award for the season in the last Shaqtin' ceremony, because he doesn't want to seem as if he's quote-unquote picking on dumbass bench players like they were trying to convey when he was getting at JaVale McGee. Who, I mean, look, I'm going to be real with you. JaVale McGee is lucky to still be in the NBA. If it was not for the Golden State Warriors, he'd be sitting at home making beats and smoking weed, allegedly.
Did they not wind up with the best record in the regular season? They win 73 games, best record obviously of all time. The following year they add KD, best record in basketball. But last year not the best record in basketball. And when you look at it, you go, oh, they've learned to pace themselves, to hit the accelerator when they need to in the playoffs.
No, not quite. They really just only won about 57 or 58 games in the regular season because of injuries.
But then they found themselves down 3-2 to Houston.
Do you see how these guys love to push narratives? I mean, damn, are you forgetting that Steph Curry missed about 30 games due to injury, MCL, and ankles? And Kevin Durant was out for a sizable portion of the season. I believe he missed somewhere around maybe 8 to 10 games. Draymond Green had an issue, a major medical issue, I believe, with his ribs or something like that. Klay Thompson with his hand.
And it wasn't until Chris Paul's not playing and Houston misses all those shots that Golden State really puts their best foot forward. So there's a sense with Golden State that they're front runners, that they're great when they have overwhelming advantages.
Well, I've made that assertion in the past. And Golden State is definitely a team that when you get them in a tit-for-tat game in the fourth quarter, you can get them to come unraveled. Because sometimes their brashness and their flash can be utilized against them. But they haven't truly played a team that has been good enough to get them into a tit-for-tat in the fourth quarter. That's why it's so important for them to establish a distance in the third quarter. Many of these top-level teams know that when you play Golden State after 3 quarters, if you're still in the game, you'll have a chance down the stretch.
But when their backs are to the wall, not so much. They folded against Cleveland before they got KD, and they very nearly did against the Rockets.
Well, there were a series of reasons why they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and we all know that, Max Kellerman. It wasn't just that they folded against Cleveland. Even though Game 7 was terrible in regards to execution, there were a series of reasons why they lost that Cleveland Cavaliers series. In regards to the Rockets, I give the Rockets credit for playing great defense, especially in Games 4 and 5. But it seems as if, down the stretch of Game 4, Golden State kind of took their foot off the pedal.
And only until Chris Paul's injury did they come forward. So the sense that Golden State is vulnerable compared to the way they were a couple years ago, I think is right. The question then becomes for Houston, how do they take advantage of that? And again, I would say, barring acquiring LeBron, which anyone would do, they have to figure out someone else on that team that can emotionally lead that team. Emotions play an enormous
Somebody
role
else on that team.
I don't think that it's an emotional issue, Max Kellerman. I think that they have to elongate their rotation. They have to go from a 6-man rotation in the playoffs to an 8-man rotation.
in the NBA on this level.
Is that what you just said?
Yep.
Somebody else on that
Yep.
team? Well, that would mean they could stand
Sure.
pat. As long as you can find somebody
No.
else on that team, that would mean you could stand pat.
Stephen A., I don't mean who's presently on the team. If that person was presently on the team, they'd have come forward in Chris Paul's absence. What I'm saying is emotions, clearly, we're both admitting it, play an enormous role in the NBA on that level when you're talking about similarly talented teams. What's the difference really in Golden State this year?
It sounds like
it's
a
attitude,
psychological
it's
perspective.
emotional fatigue.
It sounds like a psychological and philosophical perspective. I can appreciate that coming from the senior Kellerman himself. Nothing but respect and props to Papa Kellerman. But
Yeah.
you
Not
are
the
not
junior
him. You are not him. You are junior, okay? And last time I checked, you're doing sports. All this philosophical stuff, I'm not buying for it. At the end of the day,
Max Kellerman operates like a robot. He's not even sure how to generate his own perspectives. Well, that's why he has to get his takes from his dad. He has to go to the statisticians. He's not even quite sure. That's what I mean. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Let
me
me
ask you
comes down to. Excuse me, at the end of the day, because we want to make sure we give deference and respect to Papa Kellerman. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking
Stephen A.'s always
about
very
you.
respectful toward
I'm talking
him.
about you.
Yes.
This is not a. Listen, you look at Chris Paul and the Houston Rockets. If Chris Paul stays healthy, combined with the vulnerability we've seen from the Golden State Warriors, not to mention 4 straight trips to the NBA Finals, 3 championships in that span.
But you're relying
There is
on
fatigue
health.
that comes in. I'm not. Yeah, well, okay, you can say I'm relying on health, but I'm juxtaposing that to the level of tenacity,
Not as
interest,
much depth as the year
etc.
before
that
either.
you have in the
What I'm
Golden State.
saying,
Molly Karen finally touched on what the real issue was. Lack of depth. Their bench was a little bit too shallow. The reason why their bench was shallow was because their bench did not have the basketball acumen, the basketball IQ that they've had a little bit more in years past. Losing Ian Clark hurt them. Replacing him with Nick Young was a major problem because Nick Young is a big idiot. This dude recently came out and stated that the United States should legalize cocaine, which was basically just his indirect way of saying that he's a cokehead, allegedly.
Stephen A., what I'm saying is Chris Paul has an injury history, and it happened again this year. And I don't think it's coincidental that the team couldn't shoot at all without him on the floor. The question is, how do you address that issue if you're the Rockets? And my answer is, you must find a player who is capable of emotionally leading that team in the event of Chris Paul's absence, or even in a second unit if Chris Paul and James Harden are not, if neither one of them is on the floor for whatever reason in the playoffs. That's what these playoffs showed me about the Rockets.
Basically, I'll tell you this much. I don't like that position for the Houston Rockets then, because if they're listening to Max Kellerman, then they've got some real trepidation about giving Chris Paul from $150 to over $200 million. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation here.
No, Stephen A. Smith, I think that once again, you just don't seem to comprehend what Max Kellerman is saying. And it's not really that profound. All he's stating is that he believes that they have to bring in a bench player who could light a fire under the team when Chris Paul's off the floor. That's why I stated someone who might fit that mold would be a Patrick Beverley, even though I think that his price tag might be too high. But myself, I don't think that that's the issue at all. I think that the issue is that Mike D'Antoni is going to have to elongate his rotation. It's not an emotional issue. It was a physical one. They wore down over the course of that series.
This dude is 32 years old. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He's one of the elite floor generals. As far as I'm concerned, this game has seen...
He's up there. Right now, I have Chris Paul in regards to all-time point guards. He's behind Magic Johnson, of course. He's behind Oscar Robertson. He's behind Isaiah Thomas. He's behind John Stockton. And I'm not quite sure I will put him behind Steph Curry because I don't believe that Steph Curry is a true point. But he's definitely behind those other guys. And that's just off the top of my head. In order for me to put him above John Stockton, he would have to play a prominent role in leading a team to a championship.
Talent-wise, he is worthy of that money. But if there's such a huge question mark about his health, that's going to come into play, and it should for the Houston Rockets. So we'll see what happens.
All right, you spoke to him. I want to keep this conversation going, guys. So according to Stephen A., CP3 telling people that LeBron wants to play in L.A., but he's trying to lure him to H-Town. And our Brian Windhorst is reporting that the King is looking for a reason to stay in Cleveland.
Well, I did not speak to Chris Paul directly about that. I told you my sources told me that's what he said.
In other words, you're full of shit, Stephen A. Smith. As usual, you didn't speak to the person, just your quote-unquote sources are stating what someone else said. The reason why you have to say that is because you know that if you allege that you actually spoke with somebody, that means that they can come out and refute it. As long as you use the angle of my quote-unquote sources said something, then you'll leave the player quizzical as to why you're trying to say certain things on television that they have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
All right, I did not speak to Chris Paul.
I apologize, I didn't quote you right. So you spoke to sources who told you. Okay. Here are the latest odds on it. The Lakers are favorites at 2-3, followed by the 76ers, Cavs, Celtics, and Rockets, and the Warriors and Clippers, among others, continue to be long shots. Max, which LeBron move should the Warriors fear the most?
The Warriors shouldn't fear any of LeBron's potential moves. The Warriors just have to do them, and that's really all that matters. Even if LeBron were to sign with the Rockets, I think that it's going to take a while for that team to come together in that type of way. Besides that, they would have to totally reconfigure their supplemental parts on that team if they were to bring in a player like a LeBron James. I just don't think that that would be an optimal move for him. I think he'd be better off going to the Lakers with Paul George and hoping that they could trade for Kawhi, or even going to Boston and trying to force out Kyrie. To me, those would be his two best moves. But anyway, that was the video on Mr. Chris Paul and what he has planned. Once again, this up-and-coming season is going to be a referendum on Mr. Chris Paul. It's do or die for him. So peace.